Thank you, everybody out there. And we have our special guest back again. And Larry Roque is the pastor at Sunny Side Church out on 133 outside of Arcola.
Yeah, rural Arcola.
Rural Arcola. And his parishioner is Daniel Helmuth. I pronounce that right?
Yes.
Okay. And he's got a testimony that is awesome because God brought him down through a hard, the scripture came to me today was, broad is a road that leads to destruction, and narrow is the road that leads to everlasting life. And Daniel knows what the broad road is all about. And thank God he got off that road and is on the narrow path, because the broad road could have destroyed him and is destroying many young people today. And Daniel's going to give his testimony, and he wants to tell people Jesus is the only way.
That's right.
And so Daniel, you said the devil tried to kill you 4 times.
Oh.
He really didn't want you to live to this day to tell others about Jesus, did he?
He knew God had something for me, and he was trying to stop that.
Right. So would you tell the audience how you overcome by the blood of the Lamb and how you now are in the family of God?
I started up in a Christian home family, but the life at home and the family wasn't good. I didn't have a good relationship with my father. So that was kind of where it started. And at the age of 17, I left home and I got away from there. And I was out, and I guess you could say I was out hunting, searching for that love. And it just continuously took me down a bad path, and then sometimes I came back on a good path. I was doing, wasn't too bad, but what ended up where it really went wrong with me, I had been in a relationship for several years with a young lady that I had grown close with her family, and we had, everything was going all good, and at the time we hadn't been going to church like we should have. And what really took me down a bad path was at my early 20s was when our relationship really, you could say it was everything blew up. And when that happened, with me battling depression at the time and trying to deal with that, I just got off on the no drugs at that time, but I got off in the alcohol really bad. But in the middle of that, I had a gentleman that came and visited me, and he spent quite a bit of time with me, and I did end up, I gave my heart to the Lord that night, and I can still remember that night when he was there when I did that. I remember it felt like I had this giant load just lifted off of my shoulders. And I just, felt like really good for a change. And I did start going to church for a while and everything, but kind of where I went wrong was I was wanting the same thing for my girlfriend, and she wasn't she wasn't wanting to hear it at the time. She just, wouldn't go to church with me or anything. And I was still trying to repair, wanting what I had with her. So I kind of ventured away from the path of going to church anymore. And I went back following her again. So I got away, and I completely got away from church, wasn't reading the Bible or anything anymore, and that just kind of completely left my mind, you could say. And I got back into the alcohol really bad, and I finally got to the point where that was, you could say, what I was surviving on. It was mostly just the alcohol, and it very little. There was a lot of days that had a good friend of mine living below me not come up, that night to check on me. I wouldn't have ate that day. And she, looked out for me and tried to help me, what she could, even though at the time, her and her mother they weren't going to church themselves or anything either. But then I had a young lady, good friend of mine, that was from Indiana, and she had been herself in a relationship where there was a lot of mental abuse. And so what ended up, I helped her get away from that, and up until that point, I was always the type of person that when other people needed help or they needed somebody to talk to, I was always the one helping everybody.
You had a good listening ear.
I did at the time, and it was like, I had total strangers sometimes. I remember one incident, a lady had, you could say, a nuclear bomb went off in her life. She was, I don't know, how many years she'd been with her partner, and just not, no warning, just one day he just said, it's finished. I'm going back to my ex-wife, and she, had nobody, and she started working at the local coffee shop there, and she was really, really mean to all the other guys in there that were, trying to be sweet on her and that, and I think it was within a week. When it was just me sitting there, she sat down at the table and just, poured her heart out, what was bothering. So, from, I'd say, probably going back, my teens already, I knew that I wasn't like most people, I knew there was something special about me, and just, that was a large part why I left Arthur, because the people, around it, I wasn't into out, what they were doing. So, I knew that I had a gift for helping people at the time. Mm-hmm. My problem, the biggest problem, I could help them, but I wasn't helping them, in going, it wasn't like I was out there, trying to, help, turn them in the right direction, drawing them to Christ or anything.
You were a good listener.
Right.
God changed that all around.
I would, and
lead him to Christ.
It would, but it ended up, this friend of mine, she had, when I was at a really low place, and it didn't help anything, my roommate, he got kicked out of the apartment, so I was going to have to leave. And so I ended up, I remember I got a friend of mine, he helped me pack my stuff up. We loaded it all in the truck. Now, I had another place I was going to move to in town, but I dropped my dirty work clothes off, and a friend of mine was going to do my laundry while I was gone. And I headed up to northern Indiana for the weekend. I just had to get away, you know, because my life was just.
How old were you then?
I was probably about 22 at the time.
Okay.
And I guess a good way to explain it, I was going crazy. I just, I didn't know, you know, where I was going anymore or anything, and I needed a change. So I got up there, and she, you know, offered me a place to stay as long as I wanted, you know, and she was trying to talk me and just staying anyway to get away from what I was going through here. And then I had a friend that owned a pool hall there, and he offered me some part-time work. But I was going to come back because, you know, that was where, you know, everything was for me. I say everything, my belongings were with me up there already. But, you know, come Sunday night, I couldn't come back to the mess here. It was just, I had nothing, you know.
But you weren't paralyzed at that time?
No, at this time I was fully able-bodied and everything. But there was not one, I didn't have a single good reason, you know, or a single good thing to look to, you know, coming back other than I had a job. And other than that, I just couldn't, by the end of the week, I finally decided I wasn't going to come. And I ended up staying there, and she got me completely sober. I got my health back. And where we really went wrong was, I remember that first Sunday I was there, she wanted to go to church because she was the gentleman she had been with before. You know, they'd been going to church, and, you know, she was doing that at the time. And I don't really know why we didn't, and I think largely it was because I was dragging my feet at that time yet.
You weren't ready to commit your life to Christ?
I wasn't, yeah.
Okay. Now, let's kind of move on here to, why did you go to prison?
I ended up, after things happened like they did with my friend over in Indiana, it seemed like it didn't matter what I did or, you know, how hard I tried. Nothing was going right. And I got real sick health-wise, and I didn't go to work, was off work for a few weeks. And I mean, I had friends that did drugs, and I had friends that sold drugs. So, you know, I wasn't in that stuff, but I was around it. And a friend of mine, you know, offered to ask if I would sell some for him, and so that was kind of where I started. I started in it just for money to live on, but it didn't stop with that. You know, before long I was using it myself, and it was, instead of using alcohol as kind of a medication at the time, I got into the drugs, And then eventually a friend of mine's nephew asked me to help him with actually making meth, and that's where I really, went down. But it was at that point we were arrested, and I went to county for, I believe, a couple months, and I got a little bit of time. I would have had to do 6 months in that. But while I'm sitting in there, my cousin I was living with, he had actually called the police, and he had them come and get what was still at his house. And at the time, of course, I was pretty bitter about it because, I was looking at it as, a bad deal because in the end it gave me a lot more time. But I went to prison for that 6 months, finished that 6 months, and then I came back out of county to finish fighting that charge. And then that gave me another 6 years. I had to do 2.5. So I went back in and I finished my 3 years.
In that time of incarceration, were you thinking about turning your life over to the Lord yet, or had anybody come and witness to you in jail? Or
Not the first 2 years, no.
No.
No, the first 2 years I was, angry, bitter, and I was, not doing anything to try to, you could say, edify myself for anything. And it wasn't until after the 2-year mark when I got to where, finally I realized that, I needed a change, and I didn't want to be associated with that lifestyle anymore. And then I transferred also. I transferred up to Taylorville. And then in there I had, on the transfer there, one of the gentlemen that I had when I was at Taylorville the first 6 months, a gentleman that I had there in my dorm room that used to look out for me and, help me out a lot. He was coming back from county. He was trying to have a reduction on the charge. And so he told me, where he was out at and what to put in. And I put in that the day I got there for my move. And it so happened God ended up putting me right in his room where he was at.
He was God's man for the hour, wasn't he?
And then him and for the first couple months, I was there 6, 8 weeks. I was just mostly running, but then I started getting in the weights and that, and him and his friends, even though they were some of the biggest guys there, they took me under their wing, and helped me out. And one of those guys there, you could kind of say he was a pastor there in our dorm. He spent more time, studying the Bible than he did watching his TV when he'd be awake. So he was always sharing, with us. And I already knew then, that was what I needed to do. And, they always stayed on top of me, reminded me to, do my devotional every day and that. But when time came to come out, I left there, full intention that I was going to be, going to church when I got out. And my intentions was that when I get out, I was going to go with my roommate, which was, he went to Pastor Larry's church at the time.
Oh, he went to your church, Larry?
Mm-hmm.
His roommate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
So you're really a good shepherd over these sheep, aren't you?
Try to be, yes.
Well,
He-
the proof is in the pudding. He's here telling about Jesus, so he found something that guided him to your church, to
Yeah.
this fellowship.
Mm-hmm. Doug was a friend who, and he wouldn't want to be known, but he was someone who cared about Daniel and who kept, he gave him a place to live and helped him in ways that most people wouldn't, and he still
was
does
showing
today.
love, Christian
Yeah.
love,
Yes.
and that's what it's all about. Not just lip service, but actions.
Yeah.
Yes.
I had known his sister from before I was out of prison, and then that last 6 months, or that last year, I didn't even start really writing letters until toward that last year, and my ex-fiance was the one that, by then even before I had went to prison, I mean, we were, she would do anything for me, things were good between us. We just never got back in a relationship. But I was
You
writing
became
her.
friends and
Yes,
not committed.
Right. And then she was the one that I had been writing when I would write, but it wasn't until at that 2-year mark when I started really writing letters, and before that my mind was mainly just in there. It wasn't outside. And I started writing her. I used to sit there at night and just putting my thoughts on paper and sending it, but she ended up, I believe, she was pregnant at the time, and had I think she was writing me until the baby was born. But when you're a single mother and you got a baby and that, and I'm shooting her probably 3 or 4 letters before I'd get one, because she'd just write a little here and a little there. And she started to feel bad, feel guilty about that. But I had asked her before, about, saying something to Sheila about, writing me, but she didn't want to do it. For her thing was always before that, she didn't need, my mess in her life. But then I started writing her, and then it was through that, me and her writing, was where I got to meet Doug and her brother Dean, and they would actually, they were coming to visit me all the time.
Praise God.
She was, especially her, I mean, what she did for me that last year, I mean, there's most people in prison, never get that opportunity, but she was writing me. I was getting 3 to 5 letters a week from her, especially the last 6 months. And she was there almost every weekend to visit, at either her or Doug come a lot of times, One of them always came to visit.
They wanted to encourage you and
Oh,
let
yes,
you know
very
that there were
much.
people out on the outside that really cared that you.
Really, the whole family is that way. They just have a big heart for helping anybody.
Now, how did you wind up in the hospital on a ventilator?
That I had gotten a real bad infection that got into my lungs, and it had
It's while you were in prison, right?
That
You
was
got pneumonia?
no. That was was just
after.
that I went after I was shot. I went.
Oh,
They made me do a year over that incident. That's when I was on the ventilator.
okay.
But I had. It was after I had gotten out. Where I really went wrong in getting that when I got out of prison that first time, was the first several Sundays. My roommate would be gone by the time I'd be up, and I never told him that I wanted to go with him then, and so it was like every week that went by, I would started getting drawn away from that little more each time.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't, going back out into drugs and that anymore, but I was starting to drink again, and not like I used to, but it was drawing me that way. It was definitely drawing me back away from the church and what, I had with me while I was still, there at the end of prison, doing my daily devotions and that. I completely got away from that. And none of that started again, and it wasn't until after I was shot
Brought
when-
you back to the Lord. Because
Yeah.
you were running away from Him
I was.
and not running to
Yeah.
Him. And God had to put say, okay, if you want to run that path, you're going to get stopped.
I guess the way I looked at it
How did you
was
look at it?
when I went to prison, God did that to save me then, and it did stop me, and I was bitter at my family member for calling the police and having that extra put on me. But looking back now, it was a blessing, because had he not done that, I would have gotten out, and I know I would have gotten out, right back into the same life I was. But by that added time, it gave me another 2.5 years to sit and think about what I was doing.
That'll make you think.
And after, being behind bars for 2 years, that was the point where, my eyes finally opened. I looking back now, I don't know why it took me 2 years. You'd think I would have learned a little sooner, but
The devil didn't want you to.
he didn't want me to.
Receive Christ.
Right.
He was fighting you because he knew that you would be a soul winner.
He could see. I guess I looked at it as he knew what would happen if he didn't stop me. He knew that, I could do a lot of good, and he was.
You'd be Jesus' ambassador.
I
But who's this buddy up here watching us? How did you get him?
That is my friend Maggie. Step up.
Look at this. Oh my goodness, look at this.
After I was shot
Hi, Maggie.
and I was home, my home used to be real quiet, so I got a couple small parakeets, and I always wanted a big bird. And so I went and got me one. It was a male, which those are green, but he was, you could say, therapy for me. He spent a lot of the day sitting on me. And he was the one that really, was pretty instrumental in, we're able, getting out of the house and going out and about. And then after he died, I, was pretty crushed for a while.
So your first parakeet died, And this is your second parakeet.
This here's a parrot. The parakeets were
okay.
little.
A parrot. Will he bite me?
No, she's going to
Oh.
step on your hand.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. How are you? Yeah, and your name is Maggie? Yeah. You trust me, don't you? She's keeping an eye on me. Okay. Well, I'm going to give Maggie back to you because we're going to close this session. Okay, Maggie? Oh, she loves me too much. That's okay.
Hang on, Maggie.
Okay,
I got
we
it.
thank you, Maggie,
There she
for
is.
getting on television with us. And we're going to close this session. And we hope that somebody out there will understand that narrow is the way that leads to eternal life, and to get off that road of destruction. And our friend Daniel had a good testimony today. And we'll come back again and do part 2. Thank you. And I always end with shalom, peace.